All right, well, welcome back. We're now in our fifth video. And in this video, we're going to be looking at six major ethical systems, three of which would be considered non-Christian systems and three which could be considered Christian, but we'll look at those in more detail. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to share my screen with you and give you an overview. And then what we'll do is we'll go through each of the systems and then we'll apply those systems to the issue of lying. So that's where we're heading. So let's first give you an overview of the six ethical systems. Okay, the first one is called antinomianism. Okay, there's simply no laws in antinomianism. The second one is situationism. There is law, but there's only one law. Then the third one is generalism, and that there are some general laws, but there's no absolute law. Okay, and so those first three would fall in the category of a non-Christian ethical system. The next three, you'll find variations within these within the Christian world. So the fourth one that we were looking at is unqualified absolutism. Okay, this is the idea that there are many absolute laws and that these absolute laws never conflict. The next one is conflicting absolutism, which means there are many absolute norms, but sometimes these norms or these laws will actually conflict. And so then we have to choose the lesser of the evil. Graded absolutism is very similar to conflicting absolutism because they also believe there are many laws and they also believe that there's going to be conflicts, but that we must obey the higher of those laws. And so we'll look at these in more detail now. And so let's begin with the first one, which is antinomianism. Okay, when we think of antinomianism, you can see that there is no law. That's literally what it means, no law or against laws. And so in this system, there are no moral absolutes. Okay, there's no universal or general moral laws that apply to everyone. So you can see in this picture of the taxi cab, if two women are trying to get the cab, well, really it's whoever's going to get there first, because there's no really right or wrong here because there's no true law. And you can see that the basis for this is first that there is no God, and therefore there's no God-given moral laws. Second is that there's no moral objective laws. I mean, you can have your opinion as to what you think is right, but there's no moral objective law. And again, from a worldview standpoint, this makes total sense if you believe there is no God. I think this is very consistent. Three is that there is no timeless moral law. So even if you were to impose a law, that law may be good for them, but it doesn't mean that it has to be for now. And really, they're against laws because they don't believe there's any laws. Okay, so that's the first one, is antinomianism. Okay, the second one is what we call situationism. And here they do believe that there is one overriding law, and that one law is the law of love. And so when we think of the law of love, you will always want to do in every situation, and that's the word situationism, what is most loving. Okay. The problem, though, is if you think about this, is you have to define what real love is. And because wisdom is relative to love, and love is absolute, meaning that wisdom must yield to love, right? Well, this creates some problems. And if you look at it, if you hold to this view of situationism and there's only one overriding law, and that's the law of love, well, then you can have altruistic adultery, right? That you had women in World War II and that they would commit adultery to get information from the spies, but they were married to somebody else. Okay, or you could have patriotic prostitution. That again, that you don't believe in prostitution, but you, in this situation, isn't the higher love is to make sure that you're going to care for the greatest number of people. It's that utilitarian idea. And so that the American spy then can gain information by being a prostitute. And so you can read through these. There's sacrificial suicide, acceptable abortion, merciful murder. All of these would fall under this category of what we called it, a situationalism. Okay, that's the second ethical system. All right, the third system is generalism. All right, and here it's defined this way, that though those who hold generalism don't believe in an absolute ethical laws, that are universally binding, they do believe that there are ethical laws that are only generally binding, and thus the term generalism. Okay, and so this is really the ultimate aspect of utilitarianism, right? That there's some general principles, some general laws by which we need to function under and that govern us. But really, those can change based on who is going to benefit in terms of the greatest benefit for the greatest number for the greatest amount of time. And so they will hold a general idea of laws, but there's no absolutes. Okay. Okay, so those first three systems then are really all fall under a non-Christian worldview. For us Christians, though, we begin to enter into the idea of absolutes. And so the first one is this idea of unqualified absolutism. Okay, unqualified absolutism holds that all moral conflicts are only apparent and they are not real. Okay, therefore, sin is always avoidable. So if you think about World War II, and during that time, the Ten Boom family was hiding Jews in their home. Well, Corey was one of the sisters, and Betsy was the other sister. Well, Betsy held to this unqualified absolutism, and her sister, Corey, did not. She held a different system that we'll look at in a minute. And as a result, when the authorities came in and were asking, are you hiding any Jews? Betsy's response, because they were in a false floor underneath a table, she said, yes, we are hiding Jews and they're under the table. So the guards immediately looked, and when they looked, they pulled up the tablecloth and they saw there's no Jews under there, but they were under that was a false floor, and they were right underneath there. So she was actually telling the truth. And so her perspective was that God provided a way, even in my telling the truth, to protect those who were innocent. So that's unqualified absolutism. Okay, the next one is conflicting absolutism. And this would be more akin to the one that her sister, Betsy's sister, Corey, would hold to. But it's defined as, because we live in a fallen world, there are definitely moral absolutes that are going to be in conflict. They're unavoidable. Morally speaking, man is obligated to do both. In practice, conflicting absolutists will say, well, you can't do both at the same time. So I'm going to simply choose the one that I think is best and ask forgiveness in the other area. All right. And again, for this one, there are four basic premises: that God has a moral law and it's absolute. Those moral laws, the conflicts between those are unavoidable. I need to choose three, the lesser evil. And then four is that God will forgive me. And so that is how the conflicting absolutist approaches things. Then finally, in the last one, we have graded absolutism. Now, graded absolutism is very similar to the one we just saw up above, but it does have a very significant difference. And so when we think of graded absolutism, it also believes that there are going to be moral conflicts because we live in a fallen world. But what the graded absolutist is going to say is that there are varying degrees, and there are greater sins and lesser sins. There's greater rights and greater wrongs. And so when we think about the midwives, right, and that Pharaoh had told the midwives, you need to kill these babies. And they then said, okay. They went, and then when the woman was delivering, they didn't kill the babies. They simply allowed the babies to be born. When Pharaoh confronted them on the fact that the babies were still being born, they said, well, the women are robust and they give birth very quickly before we can kill the babies. And so the reality was they were lying. But what they were saying is that there's two truths. There's thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not lie. And those two are in conflict, but the idea of killing is a much greater evil than lying. And so they're not going to ask forgiveness. What they're going to do is simply do the one that is they're going to preserve life over lying. And so those are the different ethical systems, the six. And what I want to do is just take a minute now just to flesh this out very quickly by using lying as a test case. So if we look at antinomianism, the antinomianist would say this: lying is neither right nor wrong. There is no right or wrong. There is no law for whether law governing lying, because there are no laws. Well, the situationist says, well, sometimes lying is right and sometimes it's not. It depends on the situation. Well, then there's a third one, which is the idea of generalism, right? And they would say, look, we get it. Lying is generally wrong, but there are going to be times where you need to lie because it's going to benefit the greatest good or the greatest number over the long period of time. That's the utilitarian argument again. Well, the fourth one, and this is the Betsy one, right? That unqualified absolutism says lying is always wrong, and that God will provide a way for you not to have to lie and to accomplish what he wants to do. And that may have involved those people that were hiding be exposed and then being killed, but that would have been according to God's plan. And so her job is simply, Betsy's was not to lie. Lying is always wrong. Okay, the fifth one is lying is inevitable. We live in a fallen world. Let's get real. But when I lie, I'm doing it for a greater good, and I'll simply ask God for forgiveness because that lie that I told is covered by what Jesus did on the cross. And so that's the idea of conflicting absolutism. Well, graded absolutism sounds similar, but it is very significantly different. They say that lying is sometimes right if it fulfills a higher law, or lying is some meaning that, for example, I am going to, with the example we used earlier, I'm going to lie about the Hebrew women giving birth quickly in order to preserve life, because preserving life is a higher good, a higher law than the lying. And so that is a practical way of looking at the six ethical systems. The first three you can see here, systems 1 through 3, antinomianism, situationism, and generalism, all fall into the category of non-Christian major ethical systems. The final three, the unqualified absolutism, the conflicting absolutism, and the graded absolutism, all fall within the realm of Christian ethics. And so that will do it for this video. In the next video, we're going to actually begin to look at how do you develop a Christian ethic, and what is the need for it, and what is the basis. So I hope this has been helpful, and we'll be getting into the meat of things in our next video. Thanks.